gets set for Solomon Hill and Julius Randle. Now, obviously, here the return for the Minnesota Timberwolves is a little bit less, but they are getting a young asset in Julius Randle and an expiring contract in Solomon Hill. If you're not getting anything in return, this is not a bad deal. I do think the Pelicans would obviously do this because you finally get to pair Anthony Davis with another, superstar. This is a chance of maybe keeping him. You'd obviously there'd be a much better team. Their defense would be much better, even though it was pretty good last year with both, what's the point guard's name over there who played really well in the playoffs?
Drew Holiday?
Drew Holiday and Anthony Davis both being real good defensive players. This just kind of makes them better. And the third option I had was more of a swap with Portland, kind of putting Portland in the position of Toronto where nothing's really improved, so they have to trade one of the guys, and it would be a Jimmy Butler, and they would have to throw in a salary cap filler for C.J. McCollum. The Timberwolves do it because, McCollum's young, and he kind of would fit the system well. And Portland would obviously, at least for that year and the next maybe 2 years, would get better by adding Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, so out of those three trades, I'm not a big fan of the Portland one. I think that will just kind of keep Portland stagnant. I'd like it for Minnesota, even though I don't know how well Wiggins and McCollum would play together. But I do like that trade for Minnesota because you do get a very solid player in return for Butler here. I don't necessarily like it for Portland. I think it's a similar situation like you just mentioned in Oklahoma City, that Portland, this would really stagnate Portland. They're not getting that much better with Jimmy Butler. I mean, they are getting better, but not that much better. And this really does not put them above really the top 3 or 4 teams in the West. I really think that the Hornets one with really Mirotic or Randle, one of those players. Now, Randle's a little younger, so he makes more sense for Minnesota. The chances of him resigning, that's what, if I'm a Timberwolves fan or if I'm the Timberwolves GM, that's what I would worry about. I would take Etuan Moore instead of Solomon Hill. Solomon Hill, I know, missed most of last season with an injury. Etuan Moore was actually a very solid three-point shooter, so he was a solid player for the Pelicans. I would ask them to throw in whatever way you got to do to make the salary cap work. I would ask for Etuan Moore and Julius Randle or Mirotic, but like you just said, probably Julius Randle. And I really do like that trade for both teams, Minnesota and obviously for New Orleans, because now you get another superstar to pair Anthony Davis, and this might really improve the chances of keeping Anthony Davis there, especially with the way Drew Holiday played. You got yourself a solid big three now.
Especially,
and Mirotic.
And Jimmy Butler probably would at least entertain the offer to stay there.
Yeah. So I really do like that one for both teams involved. And the third one you had, probably the same situation for me when I was going over trades in my head when we were planning for this. Denver were probably the number one team that makes the most sense. I mean, Jimmy Butler would make a lot of sense in Denver. He'd fit right in probably with that starting lineup. Now, again, Denver's problem is similar to the problem Minnesota has. There's barely any depth there. They do not have a lot of players coming off the bench who provide very good minutes. I mean, you have specialists more with Trey Lyles, and I mean, Trey Lyles could stretch the floor a little bit, could block some shots, but it really doesn't change the game. Isaiah Thomas, we'll see what he does. He's really a scorer more than anything. Malik Beasley hasn't proven anything yet. So I definitely like that trade for Denver, and I like that trade for Minnesota. And I think both teams might actually be willing to make that trade because of the fact that Gary Harris is signed for, I believe, 3 or 4 more years. And Michael Porter Jr., who knows what you're going to get with him, but if he becomes what he should have became, that's a great trade for Minnesota, and Denver gets what they need, another superstar alongside Nikola Jokic. And one more trade that I'm going to throw out and add there, and it seems like the Western Conference makes the most sense for Jimmy Butler. I think he'd be a good fit in Oklahoma City. See if maybe a package of Andre Robertson, Schroeder, Grant, I mean, not all 3 players, but some type of package involving those 3 guys and a first-round pick. Or, which I don't think Oklahoma would be willing to do, but if they are, Steven Adams for Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, I mean, I like Jeremy Grant. Out of all the 3 players you mentioned, Jeremy Grant would probably be my favorite just because, he's still young and we know exactly what Roberson can do, and I totally respect Roberson's game, playing defense and all that. But his offense is so limited that I don't know if he would be a great fit for a team like the Timberwolves, just because they are kind of lacking with some of the offense. But maybe he actually would be a good team, and Andrew Wiggins can just have as much shots as he wants. But if the Thunder are not offering Adams, I don't know if I'm making the deal.
Yeah, it just really would probably depend on what's out there. I mean, there are better packages out there.
I mean, I guess at the end of the day, if you could get a pick, if the pick's the only thing you can get, and a player like Jeremy Grant, then you take it.
All right, one more before we move on to the three teams that he asked for their preferences. What about a Middleton for Butler swap? Maybe Middleton plus somebody or something for Butler. How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one because I'm trying to think if the fit of Giannis and Jimmy on the floor would be better than the fit of Giannis and Chris. I just think Chris is a better three-point shooter, and that really does help with the spacing. And Middleton is a bit younger, but adding Jimmy, who has been a more proven player and has been a perennial All-Star, that's an interesting one. That one I'd have to. I think I'm 50-50 on it right now. If the Bucks did it, I don't think I would object necessarily, just because they are taking a chance. Actually, I do think next year they would probably be a little bit of a better team if they did this deal.
Yeah, because Butler is the better defender and a better all-around player, but like you said, Middleton just might be a better fit in Milwaukee because of the fact that he could shoot a three-pointer and is a little bit younger. He might just be a better fit in Milwaukee and probably will cost a little less than Butler will cost next offseason.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair to say that Butler, and Butler has earned the right to demand request a max contract. Okay, so let's talk about this is kind of interesting. The three teams that Butler kind of mentioned. I mentioned earlier, my first thought is, okay, these are the teams that he wants to team up with Kyrie. Now, in order to do this, the Knicks would probably be the most difficult one, just because of the bad contracts they kind of have with Tim Hardaway Jr., Courtney Lee, and Joakim Noah still on the books. And even after next year, he's still going to be on the books for 1 year. So even if they were to stretch it, at least $5 million would be.
Yeah, no, depending on how much less he agrees to take. Right now, if he would agree to stretch it without taking any less money, his contract would cost him about $6 million, a little over $6 million next offseason. Depending, if he signs with it, it's probably just under $6 million, let's say. Technically over $6 million, but he would probably agree to take a little less. He'll be on the books for about $6 million over the next 3 years following this season.
Yeah, so the trade proposal I kind of came up with when it came to the Knicks would be the Knicks would send Tim Hardaway Jr., Frankie Ntilikina, and a pick. I wouldn't say next year's pick, just because I do believe it's going to be a little bit too high for the Knicks to send over. But those two players and a pick for Jimmy Butler. I think New York does this, first of all, because they do get rid of the Hardaway contract. Obviously, they're taking on the Butler contract, but they are not keeping the Hardaway contract on the books. You are giving up Frankie Smokes, who's a young player, but you do have to entice the Timberwolves in some kind of way. And I do think, again, if there's not a lot of offers for Jimmy Butler, getting a player like Frankie Smokes and a pick isn't the worst trade package you can get back.
See, if I'm Minnesota, I make it be next year's pick. Now, I might put maybe a top 5 protection, but not any higher because of the fact of what you just said. Tim Hardaway is a solid player, but he has 3 years and about, I believe it's somewhere between 40 and 51 million remaining on his contract. That's a lot of money, and you're about to pay Karl-Anthony Towns max money over the next 5 years, and you're already paying Andrew Wiggins max money over the next 5 years, and you're paying Gorgui Dieng about 48 million over the next 3 seasons. Now you're stuck with 3 bad contracts and Karl-Anthony Towns. And if I am Minnesota, I am telling you, you are throwing in. I'm probably not taking Tim Hardaway. I'm probably taking Courtney Lee, who is a little older but still a solid 3-and-D guy, Ntilikina, and next year's pick with some form of protection, but I'm not allowing there to be too much protection because I really don't like what the Knicks have to offer in a deal with Minnesota.
Yeah, if it's not Tim Hardaway Jr., though, if I'm the Knicks, I'd have to look at the salaries to make sure that I still have enough money to be able to get Kyrie Irving. The only reason I'm doing this deal is to also get Kyrie Irving to come over to the Knicks.
Is it though? Is that the only reason? Because now I think
not the only reason.
with Kevin Knox and Zinger there, I think this is the potential for a big three. I mean, with Jimmy Butler there, yeah, sure, you might not. I mean, depending on the Knicks are not in as good of a position as the Nets and the Clippers are in terms of being able to sign another max free agent guy. So the truth of the matter is they may not have that opportunity. They might have, regardless of whether they get Butler or not, they may have the opportunity to only sign, more than likely they will have the opportunity to only sign one max free agent player. And they might just have to settle for that.
Maybe. I mean, I guess maybe I'm asking, if I'm giving up Courtney Lee and not, I'm asking you guys to also take on a Lance Thomas for an extra year.
Yeah, I mean, Lance Thomas is on a one-year deal, so that's not a problem.
Looks like, okay. Well, okay, so if that comes off the books, that is good. Okay, so then, when I was looking at the Brooklyn Nets, I couldn't have come up with a trade that I think Minnesota would do. What were your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's rough. I think there would maybe have to be perhaps make it work financially. Now, Brooklyn's in a little bit of a better position than the Knicks because they have a lot of players on expiring contracts who might be worth something. I mean, DeMarre Carroll, for example. I'm trying to think who else they have on an expiring contract there, but they did pick up Kenneth Faried from Denver, and this might be a way to make salaries work. Now, if I'm Brooklyn, I might be pretty insistent on being like, hey, take Allen Crabbe off my hands. And even though Allen Crabbe is a solid player, and you know he's only signed for $37 million, but only over the next 2 years. That's a little bit of a better situation now. And so I might be being like, hey, I'll give you guys Allen Crabbe, D'Angelo Russell. We'll throw in our first-round pick, protected, whatever, top 5 similarly, but probably not too much protection, maybe top 8, top 10, whatever it takes. But throwing in either D'Angelo Russell or Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, throwing in Allen Crabbe, who's a solid player, a first-round pick. And if this might be a little too much, now you could be, if I'm Minnesota, I'll be like, hey, or I'm sorry, if I'm Brooklyn, be like, hey, you guys throw in Taj Gibson, we'll throw in someone worth a little less, make the salaries work that way. Basically, exchange of 2 players who might be solid starters, but nothing special in Taj Gibson and DeMarre Carroll or whoever else, whatever it takes. But let's say the basis of this package is D'Angelo Russell, Allen Crabbe, and a first-round pick. What do you think of this one from Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota, I like the first-round pick, so I would do it. And, I mean, Russell hasn't proven that he's a terrible NBA player yet. I mean, he hasn't proven that he's as great as maybe some people thought he would be, but he hasn't been a bad player. If I'm Brooklyn, I'm hesitant to give up the first-round pick, though, just because, you never know what's going to happen. And even though Jimmy says he wants to come play for you guys, do we know that he stays if Kyrie decides to resign in Boston, for instance? And there's absolutely no future for Jimmy Butler in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and I guess the other situation here is now Kemba Walker is also a free agent. So if Jimmy Butler if Kyrie Irving decides to stay in Boston, now Jimmy Butler just might go out and recruit Kemba Walker. And there's other opportunities. I mean, if you don't get him, even if you don't get him now, if you trade Allen Crabbe and you pick up Jimmy Butler, you still have about $30 to $35 million to go spend on other free agents next year. There's a lot of other solid young players like KCP, like Tobias Harris, like DeAndre Jordan, who none of them are flashy names, but these are players who could play. These are players who could ball.
I mean, maybe you can entice Kawhi also, because there's rumors about him trying to get a super team started in Brooklyn. I don't know how good they are, but
another option, another situation. I mean, it's hard to see Kawhi doing that, but it's something that definitely could happen if need be, if possible, too.
All right, and I think the last team we'll talk about is the LA Clippers, who obviously, if you're Minnesota, you would be asking for a Tobias Harris, who's a young, nice player, and he'd also make salaries work because he is getting $14 million this next year. And then, the Clippers do have, 2 rookies that they took in a draft this year, so one of them can be sent in a deal. Danny also talked about getting Lou Williams in a deal, maybe if Tom Thibodeau is making a trade, and he's still trying to get players who can produce. Lou Williams would pretty much be a pretty decent fit for the Timberwolves, even though they do have Jeff Teague under contract for a couple years.
Yeah, I mean, this is a situation. Minnesota could get a decent amount of depth, and I really do like Tobias Harris as a player. I think he's a perfect modern NBA player. I mean, definitely not a superstar or not even a second star, but someone who could be basically